have been married for 14 years, or we have been married for 14 years. I am the mother of three wonderful children who all keep me very busy. Alyssa is 13, Emily is 10, and Daniel is 8. I am a registered nurse of almost 10 years, but I have been working in healthcare for over 20. I was asked by Pastor Matt a few months ago if I would share my story. My knee-jerk response was a resounding no. But what I actually told Matt was that I would think about it and get back to him. The thought of getting up on stage and speaking in front of a crowd was terrifying. I am much more comfortable in the background. Getting me up on stage just for praise team took quite some persuasion. I still get nervous doing that and try to get into my safe little corner in the back behind Matt and the music stand and a big instrument as quickly as possible. Apart from speaking in front of a crowd being out of my comfort zone, I wasn't sure I had anything special to share. To be brutally honest, I feel ashamed of my spiritual journey. I have made so many mistakes and questioned God's love for me. I even rejected him when I should have been thanking him. What could I have to say that would help others with their spiritual growth? As I jotted down notes and wrote down ideas of what I wanted to share with you all, I heard a song on the radio that stopped me in my tracks. It is a song by Jason Gray called Bring It All. It starts like this. All of your insecurities, every bent and broken piece, even your anxiety, might be the gifts that you need. It goes on in another verse to say, just because you wouldn't choose it doesn't mean he wouldn't use it. Some things are better when they're broken. You never know until you bring it all. Some things are better when they're broken. That is quite a statement. I may feel broken, and there are things in my past that I would not choose again. But it is those imperfect things that have given me some of my greatest tools to succeed now. I did not have some tragic childhood that is going to make you want to cry. It was quite the opposite, actually. I was born to two loving parents. I have a younger sister who I am still close to today. I was raised in the church, and for the most part, I was a pretty good kid. I am not a native of Greenville or even Michigan. I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I was raised in Warren, Michigan. However, my parents were both from Pennsylvania. It was work that took them to Texas, where I was born. It was also work that brought us to Michigan. Not being from Michigan, they did not have anyone to show them the ropes when we landed on the east side of the state. My parents had no idea what they were getting into. We settled in a house on Pearl Street between 9 Mile and Ryan Road. I was not even a year old when we moved to Michigan, so I'm sure I was the opposite of help with this relocation process. In fact, I've heard the story a few times about how I reached up and grabbed hold of the mini blinds in the Texas house, effectively destroying them during a showing in front of the couple that was looking at the house. I have also heard how my parents learned the hard way that you don't pack all the baby supplies in the suitcase you're checking when flying. The first night in Michigan, they ended up in a seedy motel room on 8 Mile with no change of clothes or baby essentials. Not a great start to their new adventure. Life lesson number 1, always pack the essentials and a change of clothes in a carry-on bag when flying. We all survived, and they laugh about it now. Their house hunt found them a 3-bedroom ranch that was in a seemingly nice neighborhood, not too far from the elementary school. Unfortunately, just 2 weeks after moving in, we got to experience our first drive-by shooting. From what I was told, my dad was spared being shot in the back of the head by mere centimeters. He hadn't gotten around to taking the storm windows out yet. Life lesson number 2, don't place your furniture in front of the windows, and sometimes procrastination can save your life. My parents learned quickly how to be watchful of their surroundings and raised my sister and I to do likewise. Church was a regular part of our lives. My mother, my sister, and I attended a Presbyterian church in the nicer part of town. My mother was raised Presbyterian, so the church was a good fit and just the taste of familiarity that she needed. We had lots of friends at church over the many years we attended, but they were not the same friends we saw at school. It was like living in 2 separate worlds. My dad rarely attended church with us. He is what people affectionately refer to as a creaster. He shows up on Christmas and Easter. I always looked forward to the times my dad would come to church with us, though. Christmas Eve was my favorite. Standing next to him in the pews and listening to his deep voice singing Silent Night, it was the only time I got to hear my dad sing. And while there was probably a good reason for that, he's honestly not the greatest singer, he's still my dad, and it felt so surreal and perfect to be singing carols as a family. I always wish those Christmas Eve services would have lasted longer, and I have missed them so much over the years. When I was in 5th grade, my dad had an opportunity for a good paying job, doing something he thought was pretty interesting, but it took him out of town Monday through Friday. My mom was essentially a single parent. Being the oldest, I had to step up and help out. In some ways, the expectation to help created a more responsible and mature me, but in other ways, I felt resentment from feelings of inadequacy. What I took away from this was life lesson number 3. Life's just not fair. As I was headed into middle school, I got really sick. It started with strep throat the summer before my 6th grade year. I still wasn't feeling the best when I headed off to my first day as a middle schooler, but it was blown off as nerves, and away I went. I ended up spewing all over in the middle of science class that morning. I was that kid. It was so humiliating. What was happening was the start of a rare autoimmune disorder that took the doctors months to diagnose. I was tested for everything from Lyme's disease to a psychological disorder. My final diagnosis? Henoch-Schönlein purpura, or HSP for short. Now here's your science/medical/history lesson for the day. It used to be that scientists could name a finding after themselves, but it can get rather confusing keeping things straight when a name does nothing to describe what it is named after. So at some point in history, there was a push for more practical nomenclature or more descriptive names when labeling diseases or processes. Some things have been renamed over the years, and HSP is one of those. It was a Russian and German scientist that discovered and named HSP, hence Henoch and Schönlein. But what really sums up the disease process is IgA vasculitis. Many doctors will know the disease by both names and are more likely to call it HSP because, let's be real, that's just easier to say. If you were to tell someone that HSP is IgA vasculitis, they would have a much better idea of what is happening to the body. At least someone in the medical field would. HSP causes inflammation in the blood vessels or vasculature. What happens is an overreaction of the immune system after an infection, in my case, a bad bout with strep throat. An overload of IgA results in blood vessels becoming inflamed. Small blood vessels don't do well with inflammation, and the result is damage and bleeding in the skin, joints, intestines, and kidneys. The broken blood vessels under the skin create the telltale purplish and very painful rash on the lower half of the body, or the purpura, in the name Henoch-Schönlein purpura. What had the medical community so stumped was not just that HSP was rare, but it is typically seen in younger males and usually runs its course after about 4 to 6 weeks of symptoms. I was an 11-year-old female going on a few months of symptoms, and there was no slowing to the issues I continued to experience. About 6 months into HSP, I was referred to a doctor at the Rose Cancer Center. I can't remember his name. By the time I made it to his office, though, my mother once again had to recite all the issues we had experienced. He looked up at her and said he could help us. He had read some studies on the use of steroids being prescribed, in essence, to reboot the immune system in prolonged cases of HSP. His first order of action, however, was to admit me back to the hospital. I was taken to one of his procedure rooms, had an IV catheter placed on my arm, hydration fluid started, and then the doctor himself put me in a wheelchair and walked me back over to Beaumont Hospital into a hospital room. The reason the doctor walked me over to the hospital was because he was angry. He was angry that I was sent to his office in the state I was in. I can't remember if I was discharged from the ER and sent to his office or from the actual hospital, but either way, I was in no shape to be going home, and they just pushed me out the door. They pointed my mother across the parking lot and said they had scheduled us an appointment. Good luck. What I remember most about the doctor at the Rose Cancer Center was how kind he was. From what I had been told, He was not so kind to the hospitalist that day, though. It seemed like our prayers had been answered. We were finally going to get help. Then came a call from billing. Insurance wouldn't cover him. We were starting over. Yet again, I was reminded life is not fair. That was a turning point in life for me. I began to ask the question, why? I continued to fight what seemed like a losing battle. The inflammation HSP was causing in my GI tract and my kidneys was ravaging my already fragile body. I was repeatedly hospitalized for dehydration and acute kidney injury. I remember the helpless look on my parents' faces as they watched me literally wither away before their eyes. At one point, I was only 80 pounds and about the same height I am today, and so weak I couldn't even get off the toilet. For a developing young girl that was very independent, this was a humbling experience. I remember my mother fighting back tears as she helped me out of the tub one day. She could see every bone in my body. It had been weeks since I had been able to keep anything of substance down. It was shortly after that I was taken to the hospital for my longest day yet. I don't remember getting to the hospital, really. I just remember my dad's arms pulling me out of the car and thinking, it's going to be okay. He's home again. I guess it caused a little stir in the ER when they carried my listless body in, and they whisked me away on a bed. It was shortly after that spell in the hospital that we ended up in the office of Dr. Barbara Adams at U of M. This time, insurance said she was okay, and she proceeded to start me on the mega doses of steroids that the doctor at the Rose Cancer Center had wanted to try 6 months earlier, and no doctor since him would have entertained. After a year-long taper of steroids, I was declared in remission. By the age of 12, I had made medical history as the longest case of HSP ever recorded. I missed more days of 6th grade than I attended, and I was having a really hard time seeing the forest through the trees and God's hand in my life. I was left with piles of assignments to make up and spent countless hours after school in science labs or in various classrooms making up tests that I had missed. I had to teach myself most of 6th grade. I made it through, and with mostly A's and B's, but I was broken and I was angry. But kids are resilient, right? I think that must be what my parents thought, but they never asked how it was going. If they had really asked me, I may have told them how hurt I was, that God had let me get so sick, and I may have shared with them that I was constantly having to contend with wild rumors about my many absences, the most painful being that I was gone for so long because I had had a baby. 2 years later, when it came time to join the church, I went to the classes with my peers and dutifully answered all the questions right, but when we had to stand before the board of elders and declare our beliefs, I froze. I couldn't do it. Not only was I terrified to stand in front of a group of people and speak, I was being asked to profess my love of God and describe my belief system in what felt like in front of a jury. My mother drove me home in a stony silence. She never asked why I couldn't speak in front of the elders. I think she just assumed I didn't listen in class and I failed to prepare a speech. Life lesson number 4, you are on your own. That experience broke me and pushed me away from God further. I shut down. I fell into a deep depression. I started hanging out with the wrong friends, getting into trouble. My parents tried different punishments. Nothing worked. Finally, after my freshman year of high school, we moved to a tiny little town called Stockbridge, and I attended Chelsea High School. Talk about a culture shock. I went from an inner city school with regular locker searches by drug dogs, having to walk through metal detectors, not being able to carry a backpack to class because you could conceal drugs or weapons in it, to a school that had bring your tractor to school day. And the kids had rifles and dead deer in their trucks. My sister still tells me about a lady she babysat for who didn't know if she owned a key to her house because they had never locked the door. About the same time that we moved, my dad's father had come to live with us. He had been diagnosed with skin cancer, and after several surgeries to remove it, He needed more help than we could give him from a distance. He had lived many years on a boat in the Florida Keys, and skin cancer had started in his left ear. By the time he had come to us, he had had his left ear removed, and the cancer had done damage to his facial nerve. So he had left-sided facial paralysis and balance issues. I was again leaned on to help with his increasing care, as my dad was still gone for work during the week. My saving grace in all the turmoil of my life at this time was not God, but swimming. I had swum competitively since the age of 6, and my dad's father, whom we referred to as Captain John, because he lived on a boat, also had a passion for swimming. I couldn't wait to share swimming stories with him when I got home from school. He really wanted to hear about my practices, and he knew all the terminology. The cancer eventually spread to his brain and ultimately took his life. I again cried out to God for answers. I never got a response, so I swam harder. I poured my efforts into my grades and kept myself so busy with marching band and pit orchestra, swimming, water polo, weightlifting, coaching little ones in swimming and weightlifting, that I was too exhausted to feel the hurt. In my senior year of high school, I was given the opportunity to take a consortium class and train as a nursing assistant. Since my bout with HSP, the medical field had intrigued me. I was so touched by the care of the many nurses I had crossed paths with, I wanted to help others like they had helped me. That was the start of my journey to becoming a nurse. I landed a job at the local hospital as a nursing assistant while I was still in high school. My unique experiences as a young patient gave me the tools to provide empathetic and compassionate care as a nurse aide. I went on to pursue a nursing degree at Grand Valley State University. I never received my nursing degree from GVSU. God just wasn't done throwing me curveballs. I walked away with a bachelor's in psychology because I was too stubborn to walk away from a university with nothing to show for it after 4 years, and I only needed one more semester of psych classes, so that's what I did. My parents don't have college degrees. I was the first one in our family to obtain a bachelor's, and I worked really hard to figure it all out on my own. But I didn't walk at my graduation. Again, my parents never asked why. I was still so angry with God and frustrated with life. I didn't feel like I could ask my parents for help, and I felt like it was such a hassle for them to attend my graduation that I just threw my hands up and said, forget it. It wasn't the degree I really wanted anyways. Don't let me waste your time. My time at GVSU wasn't a complete waste, though. Aaron and I met through work on campus. He was this tall, bald guy with broad shoulders and kind eyes that shook my hand for way too long when we met. Then he just kept showing up everywhere, and again, shaking my hand like we never met before. Eventually, I caved and married him. I was off on a new adventure. We started attending this church, and I worked at home as a home health aide. I was still very reserved with God, though. I didn't quite trust him. My marriage wasn't living up to my expectations either. It wasn't the joint journey I thought we were embarking on. I was looking forward to building a new life with a partner. Instead, I was overwhelmed with a new family that was almost the polar opposite of the family I was raised in. They got together often. They seemed to all want to get together all the time. They stopped by. They wanted to know about me. And they continued to encourage me to complete my education. On the flip side of that, my father finally had a son and wanted to do guy things with him. My parents adored Aaron. I was chopped liver. We were living in Aaron's hometown. He knew everyone, I knew no one. We got pregnant right away after we got married, and my mother was angry. I thought I had forgiven things and moved beyond the past hurts of disappointing her when I failed to join the church, but really, I had just been running from it. I distinctly remember the day we were on our way from her house to Jackson, and I made the comment about being surprised when we found out we were expecting Allie. Mind you, I was very pregnant at this time, and she responded kind of scathingly with, well, with you going into nursing, I didn't think I needed to explain the birds and bees to you. Ouch. I was speechless. My mother, for those of you that don't know her, is usually a very soft-spoken, kind-hearted woman. However, she had always told my sister and I that we shouldn't get pregnant for a year after getting married. She wanted to make sure things would work out and we shouldn't bring children into something that we couldn't finish. My mother was again disappointed in me. Life lesson number 5, I will never be enough. It wasn't until we had Allie that I turned back to God. I am again reminded of Jason Gray's song. Part of the second verse says this, "Are you telling me my weakest places could really be where God's amazing grace lives?" When I delivered Allie, I hemorrhaged severely. At first, it was this amazing thing. This beautiful little girl was placed in my arms, and she really was perfect. Then, as they took her over to the bassinet to clean her up, and Aaron was busy being amazed and taking pictures with a real camera, you didn't have it on your phone at this time, things went bad. The bleeding just wouldn't stop, and they delivered shot after shot. More nurses were filling up the room. People started running and calling for things. That's when Aaron finally realized there was actually a problem. He was pretty enamored with Allie. She really was perfect. The doctors and nurses were pushing on my stomach so hard, massaging my uterus is what they called it, to try and get it to contract. Fluids and Pitocin were pouring into my IV. They were calling for mass transfusion blood, and I was losing consciousness. That's when I said the most heartfelt and simple prayer I have ever uttered. I'm not sure you could even call it a prayer. It was more a plea. I looked towards the bassinet where my little girl lay so quiet and content and said a silent, "Please, God, not now. I worked so hard to meet her. Don't take me now." This time, God answered. I felt a presence over my left shoulder, and a peace came over me. I knew it was going to be all right. And the bleeding stopped. The doctor breathed a sigh of relief, and everyone started cleaning up. I had a new purpose in life. I was a mother, and I was given a second chance for a reason. I took that to heart and pursued my nursing degree. I finished my associates in nursing through Montcalm Community College. We welcomed Emily to our little family while I was working on that degree, and life was hard. I was so busy with school, trying to be a good wife, raising a family, helping my mother with more failing grandparents. I was running on empty and too ashamed to ask for help. Life hasn't slowed down over the years, and more things kept piling on me until I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world. It was over a year ago that I was working on finishing my BSN through Purdue Global, and thanks to COVID, the world came to a grinding halt. Well, the non-medical world did anyways. I was working more than I cared to, and trying to complete my courses while balancing virtual school for the kids. One day, Emily looked at me and asked why I never smiled anymore. That's when I knew it was time to swallow my pride and ask for help with my depression. Yet again, God used my brokenness to reach me, and my children were saving me. For so long, I have struggled with feeling like I was not good enough for God's grace and not worthy of anyone's help. I continued to give of myself even though I was empty, and I used my brokenness and rejection to work harder, trying to make up for my wrongdoings by giving more. But that's not how God's love works. Jason Gray's song fits so well. God knows how to use your fear of rejection, the way it tunes you in and fires up your engine. It becomes a gift the moment you accept it. So look at yourself and forgive your weakness. Just because you wouldn't choose it doesn't mean He wouldn't use it. When I was asked to share today, I felt like I was going to have a repeat of my time in front of the Board of Elders. I was so worried about what others might think of my imperfect story and feared rejection. But the more I dug into this speech and prayed for God's help, the easier it was for me to see how He has walked with me all my life and at times carried me. Jason Gray's song was another message from God nudging me along my journey. Even though you'd rather hide it, there's something beautiful inside it. So bring your heart and lay it open. His perfect will comes to life in imperfection. When you give him all of you, you'll never know until you bring it. So bring it all. Thank you.